All right, today we are going to wrap up our study of Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union and authoritarian states with Stalin's foreign policies during his rule. So we're going to start off with the beginning of the Soviet Union in 1922 and the creation of Comintern. So the early goals of the Bolshevik Revolution were not just for a communist revolution in Russia, but for a worldwide communist revolution. This was the focus of Lenin and Leon Trotsky's visions early on. The Comintern, Communist International, was actually founded in 1919 during the Russian Civil War that advocated a worldwide communist revolution. And Comintern offered Soviet support for early revolutions in Europe following the First World War, but none of these ended up being successful. Lenin's death would move Joseph Stalin, though, to supporting socialism in one country, and Comintern would be adjusted rather than supporting international revolutions. Its efforts would be more on defending the Soviet Union from outside threats. Now, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany is also going to lead to some changes in Soviet foreign policy. With the rise of Adolf Hitler in 1933, the relationship between the Soviet Union and Germany that had existed since the 1922 Treaty of Rapallo is going to sour. The Nazis' targeting of the Communist Party in Germany, along with Nazi anti-communist propaganda, is going to ultimately pull the Soviet Union and Germany away from each other. Also, talk of German leaders about acquiring territory in Eastern Europe, which would be the Soviet Union, would not allow this relationship to continue. Soviet foreign policy through 1939 then was directed at Stalin's views of security and how could he keep himself safe amidst a rising German threat. The Soviet Union would join the League of Nations in 1934. The Soviet Union entered treaty agreements with countries like France and Czechoslovakia in 1935 to try to offer defensive alliances should any of those countries be attacked. And obviously, Germany was the biggest concern for all of them. These agreements, though, really lacked any teeth. They would be mostly symbolic because they still required British agreement and League of Nations support for any actual military action. Now, in 1936, Germany and Italy and Japan would enter into the Anti-Comintern Pact. And this was seen as a major threat for the Soviet Union because now future conflict for the Soviets could possibly involve a two-front war with Germany in the West and Japan now in the East. So finding allies in the years ahead would be a focus for Joseph Stalin, but the escalating Great Purge from 1936 to 1938 and that news making it around the world made it very hard for Western powers to offer support for Joseph Stalin. Plus, their anti-Bolshevik, anti-communist rhetoric was already deeply ingrained. In 1938, in October of 1938, the Munich Conference, followed by the Munich Pact, would create new fears in Joseph Stalin regarding Soviet security from foreign aggression. In this agreement, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Germany all agreed to offer Germany the Western Czechoslovakian region of the Sudetenland in hopes of maintaining peace in Europe beyond. The Soviet Union was not invited to the conference. This agreement was viewed as anti-Soviet and forming a coalition of Western states against the interests of the Soviet Union. The Soviets and Stalin would make attempts in 1938 and into 1939 to negotiate new alliances with the UK and France, but these were ultimately unanswered, as neither of those nations, especially the British, had any interest in working with the communist Soviet Union. So, rebuffed by Western powers, Joseph Stalin will enter into his own agreement with Nazi Germany in August of 1939. The Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, or the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, would call for non-aggression between Germany and the Soviet Union. But the agreement also included a secret additional protocol that would allow the Soviet Union to expand its borders further to the west, dividing Poland between Germany and the Soviet Union, and offering up the Baltic states and Finland to the Soviet Union following this agreement, essentially allowing the Soviet Union to regain territory that Russia had lost in the First World War. So from 1939 to 1941, the start of World War II leads the Soviet Union to taking back that territory they had previously had. But the Finnish resistance in the Soviet-Finnish Winter War of 1939 and into 1940 would prove disastrous for the Soviet Union. Remember the purges of the Soviet military, where 35,000 officers were executed, and the remaining officers were inexperienced or just unwilling to talk about challenges they were facing to their superiors, and certainly not to Stalin. This ended up being a disastrous victory for the Soviet Union. This would lead Adolf Hitler in June of 1941, 2 years before many of his generals thought the army would be prepared for a major offensive in the East, to actually invade the Soviet Union. And Stalin, because of his agreements with the Nazi Germany, was unprepared for this invasion. Early setbacks in 1941 and 1942 would be followed by extremely costly victories, including the holding of the city of Stalingrad and ultimately the capture of Nazi Germany's capital of Berlin. Soviet propaganda during the war would proclaim Joseph Stalin as the heroic national leader that led his country to victory in what was known as the Great Patriotic War. After World War II, the Soviet Allied victory over Germany left Stalin in an even stronger position than he had been prior to World War II. The Grand Alliance that had been formed between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union left him in a preeminent role with regard to foreign policy in a post-war world, and he would use his newfound political capital to solidify Soviet security in a post-war world. The Soviet Union and Joseph Stalin would establish the Soviet satellite empire in Eastern Europe from 1945 to 1948 that would leave pro-Soviet governments in control of Eastern European states like Poland and Hungary and Romania and Czechoslovakia. And these states would offer a buffer from Germany and other Western powers that were seen by Joseph Stalin as a threat. These states could also provide material aid and food for the Soviet Union that was in desperate need following the disaster of World War II. In the early Cold War years, Joseph Stalin's foreign policy would have a tremendous effect on the development of that conflict with Western powers and the United States. From the creation of the Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe, the ultimate division of Germany between East and West, the entry into a nuclear arms race as the Soviet Union would develop a nuclear weapon in 1949 to counter that of the United States. Support, but a lot of suspicion of the newly created People's Republic of China, led by Mao Zedong, following the successful communist victory in the Chinese Civil War in 1949. And support of the invasion of South Korea by Kim Il-sung in North Korea in 1950. That war would only end with the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953. If you want more information on all of these subjects, you can find them, and we'll discuss them in greater detail in our early Cold War conversations. But essentially, Joseph Stalin's role as a leader of the Soviet Union was solidified by the Second World War and these early years of the Cold War. So his foreign policy successes ultimately left him in a stronger position at home. We'll see you next time.